Hi, everyone. Welcome to PeopleMetrics Live. Today, we're talking about clinical and commercial customer experience in pharma and reviewing 10 universal moment of truth touchpoints in the pharma customer journey. Sean, before we dive into everything, can you just give us a quick recap of what pharma customer experience, or Pharma CX, as we'll probably refer to it throughout the rest of this session, what that is exactly?
Right. So, I'm writing a new book called Pharma CX Secrets. And, it's something that, I've been thinking a lot about. And, we went through a PeopleMetrics Live about this as well recently. But in a nutshell, Pharma CX is three things, and they're all kind of combined into this one process. And the first step in how we define Pharma CX is intentionally create experiences. So experiences for your customers, and we say customers, we're talking about patients, HCPs, caregivers. They happen whether you create them or not. And part of Pharma CX is this intentionality about creating these experiences. So it's thinking about what are those key interactions you're having with your customers, and how do you want those interactions to go? How do you want your customers to feel? How do you want your customers to act after you have an interaction with them? And it's always best to plan those and create them and orchestrate them as much as humanly possible, which is what all the great consumer brands do. They don't take much to chance. They map out journeys. They make sure that every interaction is understood, and they intentionally create experiences. So that's the first step. Now, after you think about and intentionally create them, it's about, okay, how are we doing with that in reality? Because you can create an experience or the way you think it would go, but it doesn't always go the way you think it'll go. So that's why you have to measure the effectiveness of the experiences. And that's just not measuring it once in a while, it's measuring it continuously. So you continuously reach out and measure those experiences that you've created at key touch points or moments of truth, as Madeline has been talking about earlier in this PeopleMetrics Live. And then after you measure, there's one final key step, and that's proactively managing CX, or managing CX proactively. So that does not mean, every once in a while get data back and take an action. It's take an action, see if that worked, tweak how you'd like those experiences to look, which is kind of the final arrow, measure again, and then see whether it works. So you're constantly intentionally creating, you're constantly measuring, and you're constantly taking action. And this action can be a couple different levels. This action could be at an individual level. So you're following up with a patient that had a poor experience, that might not onboard onto your new medication, and you're making sure that anything that you can do to make that right is done. And that's at an individual level. Or, and this is also really important, you can look at it at an aggregate level and say, hey, lots and lots of problems are happening around this touch point for all of our customers. And that certainly gets into clinical too. Perhaps the literature that we're providing isn't clear when they first start the trial. That's something we can fix either in this trial or future trials that will make the experience better over time. We'll get into some of these touch points in a second, but and you have the diagram up here, Alan. That's really what Pharma CX is.
Yeah, the 3 steps in that Pharma CX feedback loop that you just reviewed of creating, measuring, managing.
And Madeline, the second words are really important because, experiences happen whether or not you create them intentionally. Those experiences will go on, and you can measure them every once in a while, or you can measure them continuously, or you can act once there's a problem, or you can act proactively. And the intentionally, continuously, proactively words are super important to understanding kind of what Pharma CX is and what CX is in general across industries.
Thanks for clarifying that. I was going to say, this is something that I think we've had conversations about before, where the intentionally, continuously, proactively really speaks to that this isn't a one and done kind of thing, right? Pharma CX is a program or a process that you're putting into place at your organization. So thank you for clarifying that. And yeah, those second words are super important.
Or anything you'd want to add to that before we
Yeah,
move on?
I think one last thing I'd note, which we touched on in our journey map discussion last week, is these experiences are happening. That intentionality is very important, and it's really is how can we intentionally create these from that patient point of view, because these are designated points of a process, which of course are going to have to get regulatory approval, legal approval. But it's one step beyond that. It's not just, have we checked a box in, this is something that I've, met the regulatory requirements of. It's what's the patient's experience like throughout these steps, and how can we better serve them? How can we build a customer experience for them, not just patients, but caregivers and HCPs, et cetera.
Absolutely. And it is a departure. I mean, people might be watching this and saying, but yeah, we do this. We do market research. We do measure sometimes. But it's not just one or the other. And we maybe do a journey map. It's bringing them all together, right? Like that's the key part of it. And it's coming up with a plan to have experiences that are great. And why do we want great experiences for our customers, patients, caregivers, HCPs? Because patients who have great experiences tend to behave in ways that produce good outcomes, medical outcomes, meaning they'll onboard onto new medication, or they'll go to that clinical trial and they'll stick through the trial. They'll adhere over time if we're on the commercial side again. And their outcomes, their medical outcomes, tend to be much better than if the experience is a struggle, for instance, to onboard, or if the experience is a struggle to find the trial location site, or it's a struggle to understand what this is that I'm going through, or it's a struggle to understand what are the expectations on me as a patient as I go through this trial, right? They're just more likely to stick around and go through the trial, which then has better outcomes, not only for them, hopefully, but for innumerable patients in the future on the clinical side. And on the commercial side, adherence over time could make the difference between a high quality of life and not. It even could be, a life or death situation for certain cases.
Hi, it's Madeline. Thanks for joining us for PeopleMetrics Live. If this is your first time watching, PeopleMetrics Live is a weekly live webinar session where experts from our team answer your questions about customer, employee, and patient experience measurement and management. And sometimes we show you how you can achieve your goals using tools within our experience management platform. We've been doing this for over 2 decades now, and this is a great way for us to share all of our knowledge with you. You can sign up for upcoming sessions of PeopleMetrics Live at www.peoplemetrics.com/events and bring a friend.
So this responsibility for pharma around really creating a great experience is as much as they can, and that's a good point that you made earlier, Kirk. There is regulatory kind of constraints that maybe other industries, definitely other industries don't have, like hotels or financial services. But that being said, the principles of CX still apply. But the stakes are so much higher. And I write about this in the book. It's one thing improving the checkout speed at a line at a hotel, or making a call that somebody makes to a contact center to understand their bill, make that more smooth and more pleasant. It's quite another thing helping, say, someone who has a rare disease onboard onto that new medication as quickly as they can, and make sure they understand how to take that medication and adhere over time. I mean, that's a very different kind of table stakes in terms of creating those experiences, simply because the outcomes are much higher and they're much more important, frankly.
Yeah, and I think one last thing I would note on that is that it is very doable. I think you described it before, Sean, is there is this renaissance in pharma companies of understanding we need to measure and improve the experience. So this is something that folks are doing. You're not going to be, the very first person to do this. It's very possible. And kind of exactly as you mentioned within a hotel, of what is that check-in experience? What is that, check-out experience, or the experience of the room quality? Within, as a customer, it's easy to imagine these kind of core moments of truth. And that same parallel exists within the pharma world, partially because of that regulatory environment. There are defined steps throughout the way.
Right. And let's get to them, Madeline.
All right, here we go.
So Kirk, you've worked on a lot of clinical trial work. Why don't you just take us through some of these? These are 5. They're not the only 5, but these are 5 that we've seen over and over again as pretty important.
Exactly. These are some of these. If you haven't started a feedback program before, these would be great places for you to start, as they cover these moments of truth. And this is really what it is. As a patient or as a trial participant, what are these moments that are core for me, where I could use some check-in and some follow-up and management of this experience. Now, some of these 5, which we're commonly seeing across our client base, are: 1, post-literature distribution, patient onboarding onto a new trial, that beginning experience, checking in partway through the trial, close of the trial, and then following up. And I do want to start in on that very first one, that post-literature distribution, because this is a good example of how it's different from your standard research. Because of course, pharma companies put a lot of effort into what is the design of our literature? Is it easy for patients to understand and caregivers to understand? That is its own style and house of research, which is different from, you've just received this literature. Do you recall receiving it? How easy was it for you to understand in the moment? This idea of actively in the moment collecting feedback as folks are going through this experience, this is different from literature design at the start. And these really do work in sync, which is how, Pharma CX is differentiated from these other styles of research.
And, Kirk, sometimes we get a pushback and say, well, we can't change protocol. It's already set, right? Why bother? But there's a good answer to that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the idea being, in the clinical trial space, of course, the protocol is set. You're not going to change these things, in the moment for an ongoing clinical trial if you find something that you wish were different. But this is then used to improve the further clinical trials that you are going to design. If you understand, we've identified this gap from kind of patient feedback, from real-time patient feedback or participant feedback with our literature, that's something you can use in future design.
Exactly. And we've seen even circumstances where sometimes this literature can be, if it's just some sort of clarity issue, it can be changed even within the same protocol. So it's like that if anything can be changed, it could be, clarity and communication certainly can be. But you're right, like anything that is more substantial can be changed in future ones. I mean, we see other moments of truth in clinical trials, and next PeopleMetrics Live is all about clinical trials. So we don't want to give too much away, but like if you have a very hard to reach destination, site, patients are concerned about transportation there. So maybe transportation to the clinical trial is a key touch point, right? We've seen that too, right, Kirk? So there's others that may even be beyond this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so these moments of truth are certainly going to have some variability across each clinical trial, across companies. However, these are a great core 5 to start if you're imagining this type of program.
And let's also be clear what kind of patient feedback we're talking about in clinical trials. We're not talking about feedback on the medication, on their disease state, on their reactions to whatever the drug that they're trialing is. This is about the experience in the trial. It's everything but that, right? So it's, do I understand the way the trial will work? Do I understand how to get there? Do I know who I can reach out to if I have any questions? Do I understand the technology? If there's a technology component as part of the trial, is that easy to understand? Is it easy to access? There's all, and Transcelerate, which we'll get into next time, is a great place to start. They have a lot of, great questions around these different touch points, onboarding, midpoint, and closing of the trial and post-trial follow-up that we will get into. But just so we kind of put some guardrails about, what kind of questions are we asking? What kind of experiences are we talking about? It's the experiences outside the reaction to the medication.
Precisely. And that's a great point. And I would say pharma already does a very good job of that. And you have teams of scientists and researchers who are there to collect that medical information. That's what you're doing well. The second thing that pharma is still getting caught up with or caught up to is you're not just collecting this medical information, you're inviting people to participate in these trials. How is that experience of participation? And that's where the questions are really honed on improving that.
And in clinical, we'll get into this next time, but caregivers are also huge in clinical, as they are in commercial at times, depending on the patient. and just getting their perspective on these things, because they're often involved across these different phases of the trial, is also key.
Did you know that you can watch past sessions of PeopleMetrics Live right here on our YouTube channel? All you have to do is click the link above. Be sure to check them out for answers to dozens of questions, along with stories, tips, short tutorials, and best practices from our team of experts. You can click the bottom right corner of this video to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an update.
All right, Madeline, why don't we get to the next 5?
All right, patient support services.
Right, so now we're on commercial, and this is an example of both clinical and commercial, and there's other use cases for Pharma CX in commercial outside of patient support services, but patient support services is a great way to start thinking about how you can create an experience for a patient in a way that's just excellent. And it's a great place to start because almost every new product has patient support services attached to it, whether it's just a digital patient support services website portal or a full-blown case manager model with, a call center, and you're able to reach out to them. And it's a critical onboarding experience that requires, in my opinion, a lot of effort, and it's totally worth the money to invest in creating a great experience in the onboarding area, as well as shortly after onboarding, after they've started to kind of adhere to the drug. Right, Kirk? So there's a bunch of different ones that we could talk about, but these are 5 that we see often.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right that we emphasize patient support services just because it is such a great starting point. It takes a lot of investment to do this, of either you have a third party doing it, or you had to build your own team or build your own, suite of services to reach out to patients and caregivers and HCPs, and, measuring the success of those services. It can be hard to delineate, what exactly did these support teams do versus kind of what the rest of the brand or the commercial teams are doing. But when you collect that feedback of here's how satisfied they are with the teams they interact with, here's how satisfied they are with the level of communication that they receive and the ease of going through these processes of a welcome call, of that first treatment, of your events and your field liaisons, that is a very tangible way of saying, we collect this feedback, we know how valuable this is or what we need to change.
Right. So if a lot of these moments of truth depends on your product, right? So if you have a field liaison that's visiting the patient's home, then that's probably a moment of truth for you, right? Anytime you have that kind of personal interaction, without a doubt. Now, you might not have a drug that has that, but everybody gets onboarded, right? And that should always be, that welcome call first infusion could be thought of as an onboarding moment of truth. That's always key. And then touching base after they onboard, we have programs that have 6-month check-ins, 12-month check-ins. You could even do an 18-month check-in depending on what it is. And it's just like these periodic check-ins to make sure that the patient, isn't having any issues, can contact, your support services when they do have questions, don't have any problems, say, traveling with the medication, don't have any problems kind of if it's an injectable, injecting it, or finding a center to get help with regard to administering it. Like there's all these different pieces of the experience, again, outside of the effectiveness of the medication for their disease state. That's, again, we're not talking about that. We're talking about everything else around that, but that can make or break product launches. I mean, we're doing a PeopleMetrics Live, right, Madeline, in a few weeks on this, on product launches.
Yep.
But I mean, we've seen this over and over again, the experience the patient and the HCP has around the new medication, both prescribing it and onboarding to it, can make or break your product launch. And it's simply not good enough to have great products anymore in pharma. Great products are the price of admission, products that are efficacious and are able to, work in a very safe manner. And all of those things are extremely important. But in order to really create a blockbuster these days and something that's very effective, the experience part of it is absolutely as important, if not more so in some ways. And I know that may sound crazy to people in the industry. Like why would we have to worry about that? It's just consumers these days are expecting good experiences because so many other industries has focused on it. Like the experience that you have now to order takeout is like so much better than it used to be. The experience you have to just find your favorite song is so much better than it used to be. The experience you have to buy a toothbrush, right? You go into Amazon, you can do this in a second, is so much better than it used to be. It's just the bar has been raised for experiences. And again, I'll come back to my kind of what I said in the beginning. The outcome of these experiences are much more important than whether you get that toothbrush in 2 days or not. Mm-hmm. Yet these companies are maniacal about looking at every interaction these e-commerce customers have with their website to make sure it's as easy and great as possible.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I think another kind of thing we'd call out, anytime you have one of those interactions, the feedback that is collected is immediate. Of after you make that purchase, it's how was that purchase, or after you finish an Uber ride or make your purchase for food, it's, you know, how many stars was that? How good was that interaction? With Pharma CX, the fact that it's being measured continuously and then managed in real time is a key part of it. Back, of course, to what I was saying about literature, pharma companies are already getting patient feedback from literature design, but are you getting feedback in real time on how that's being received and managing that in real time? That's where it becomes really elevating. That's where Pharma CX becomes really important, especially on that commercial side of, you just completed that welcome call. How was it? How can we follow up if you had a negative experience to manage that?
Right. And the other thing about Pharma CX is that this information is not constrained or siloed into a specific department, right? So when we keep talking about, you know, collecting this information continuously, maybe we should make sure we're 100% clear on what we mean by that. We're collecting it and distributing it to the entire organization as needed. So everyone in the company might be able to get access to it, or certainly in the patient support services example, case managers would get access to their cases in real time. The head of patient support services would receive all this information. The person running the brand would receive this information, right? The market research and insights person certainly would be able to see this information. And so it gets into more people's hands, including the people responsible for delivering the experience. And I think that's also a really important point. It's not filtering down to that person through a PowerPoint presentation necessarily. Yeah. Although those things might still occur at times, and they should. But the real-time nature of these programs is, you know, they're understanding when a customer that they interacted with yesterday, when I say customer, again, I mean a patient, HCP caregiver, they know if that customer did not have a great experience, and it trickles right to them via software and technology, which is another kind of key part of CX in general.
Our founder and CEO, Sean, is writing a new book all about creating, measuring, and managing customer experiences in the pharmaceutical industry called Pharma CX Secrets. In this book, Sean presents 20 easy to implement but powerful strategies that you can use to turn your pharma company into a truly patient-centric organization in both commercial and clinical settings. Pharma CX Secrets will be available on Amazon soon. Go to peoplemetrics.com/pharmacx secrets to sign up to be notified. And that's a perfect segue, Sean, because we have another diagram to show exactly how that process would work.
Yes.
So maybe we can go through and just go around this circle to kind of give a more tangible explanation of how this might go around the circle for a survey that gets completed. That's a great
segue, Madeline. Right. So when a customer, patient, HCP caregiver has an experience, moment of truth, ideally, with a clinical or commercial type therapy, then they are introduced to a brief survey. And we say brief, we're not talking about an hour, we're not talking about 30 minutes or 15 minutes, we're talking about a couple of minutes. And the purpose of the survey is only to understand what their experience was with that moment of truth. That's why it can be short, that's why it can be targeted, and that's why it can be done without incentives and honoraria for the most part. Kirk, here are some methods, right? We use all of these different methods to collect the feedback. Anything you want to? Yeah.
Absolutely. And the main thing to keep in mind is you want to meet your customers where they are. So commonly for patient support services, that's going to be via email or text, or sending them to an IVR survey after call is completed. With clinical trials, they're commonly at a site, and you can have an iPad or some sort of in-person survey that's completed there. And then, of course, with HCPs, there are kind of various ways you can reach out to them, kind of all of the above here. So, but the core thing is meet customers where they are, and there's a lot of kind of best practices on how to do that here.
Yes. So they're invited, they provide the feedback, they submit the survey through whatever vehicle that they were provided it to. And then real-time feedback is provided to specific people within the pharma organization who have access. And this can be as many as needed and as many as can be in many cases. And so that's available in real time. The system that we employ also can alert you if a specific individual, patient, usually within patient support services, had a poor experience. So they can be followed up on. There is PII safeguards around that. So their information isn't being distributed to anyone who doesn't need to know. But there is a way then to match a unique ID that we provide with their patient information. And they would be able to be followed up on to make sure that they don't have any issues with regarding the services and support they're receiving.
All right.
And then the final step is there are trends and insights that can be gathered from many, many different interactions, feedback that you can use to change the entire program. Everything with any of those touch points that we mentioned, you'll understand whether you've intentionally created them in the right way. Nobody's ever perfect. That's why you have to start with the best possible experience you think can be given. Then you listen to your customers, you look at what they say, and then you adjust. And after you adjust, you continue to listen and see if your adjustment worked or not. And that's Pharma CX, and that's really patient centricity in a nutshell. How do you become patient centric? You start a program like this. As many programs like this as you possibly can with any way that you interact with your customers.
Yeah, and those moments of truth that we touched on, those are great places to kind of begin and think of where are those places where we are having the biggest impact on our customers. Those are often the clinical and commercial points. And once you have identified those stages, this is exactly kind of screen identifies, goes through what you should be doing to make sure you are providing that best experience possible.
Exactly.
This was great, guys. Thank you for taking us through this. And I like that we came back to, this final arrow of closing the loop is when you're coming back to that intentional creation of experiences. And I love what you said, Sean, that it's an ongoing process. You're never going to get it right the first time. All you can do is be intentional with creating that experience and keep iterating on it as you go round and round the loop. So we've just got a couple minutes left here, and I had a couple of questions that I wanted to throw at you guys. I think we touched on both of these things in the session already, but if we can do a quick recap on them. We've got two questions. One is on the clinical and commercial side, where would be a good touch point to start? And then the second question was on the commercial side, are we only talking about patient support teams, or is there more opportunities for Pharma CX in other areas of pharma companies? So just a quick Kirk,
why don't you take the first one? I'll take the second.
Sure. I think on the commercial side, for a touch point, definitely that welcome call or first, first treatment is where our clients start, because that's where so many important things have just concluded and it's coming to fruition. That's where you want to collect that feedback from the patient. From the clinical trial side, it's going to be likely. I think there's a few different places. It's generally where do you have most of that involvement from the patient? So probably it's going to be either the conclusion of the trial or midway through the trial, somewhere where you can get a good bit of feedback on your entire process. If you're going to start somewhere, that would be a great place to start.
All right. In terms of the second question on, is it only patient support services? It isn't. Patient support services is a great place to start. That's generally focused on the patient, although there is HCPs that we will reach out to as part of the process because they also are highly involved in communicating the patient support services is available to patients, and sometimes calls, accesses that support themselves. But if you think about HCPs and physicians in general, pharma can touch them in many different ways outside of this. So there's a journey that HCPs go on with pharma, from, sales reps that might interact with the physician, to educational opportunities that pharma might offer, to, technology and portals or whatever else that you have to educate them about the disease state and products. To me, it makes a lot of sense to think about that as, what is that HCP overall experience? Make sure that you're mapping out those interactions and having some continuous feedback, not just, a study every once in a while via, a market research angle, which those are also good, but to continuously measure that physician experience, HCP experience, to make sure that it's as good as it can be. And that can be, depending on how your company is organized, it's harder to do that at a brand level. That probably is a product level branding type piece and therapeutic area, but it's a way to think about it, and it's another kind of example of how I think you can use the Pharma CX principles for another audience.
Awesome. Great answers, guys. Well, thank you both. It looks like we are at time here. So this was a great discussion about clinical and commercial customer experience in pharma. And I hope that this has been a valuable conversation for everyone we've got on the line today. I will make sure that this, when this goes up on our YouTube channel, we include a link to all of the diagrams that we shared today. And on behalf of everyone here at PeopleMetrics, thank you for joining us for PeopleMetrics Live. If you liked this video, make sure to subscribe right here so you never miss an update. And have you checked out other sessions of PeopleMetrics Live yet? You can click right here to watch them all. I'll see you there.